everyone. Welcome to Thrive Tribe Talks. My name is Tim Roberts and I'm the Managing Director of Thrive Tribe. I'm really pleased to have you all join us today. I know some of you are watching live and some of you will be watching this on record. So we're joined by lots of health professionals from across the country today. Oh, I'm being told no sound. Can someone put in the chat that they can hear me? Before I say any more, someone could just pop in the chat that they can hear me. Fab. It's okay, somebody said there's no sound. That might be more their end. Yes, we're joined by lots of health professionals today on the topic of weight management, and in particular, how you as health professionals can speak to your own patients and clients on the very sometimes difficult and sensitive issue on how you talk about somebody's weight. Very important to have these conversations, of course, because weight can have a huge impact on health, but having that conversation is tricky. So today we're going to help you with that, and we're joined by two guests. We're joined by Dr. Richard Pyle, who's Thrive Tribe's lead GP, and he will also tell you a little bit more about his wider background, and also Dr. Heather McKee, a behaviour change specialist, and they will be guiding you through some ways you can think about the issue of weight management and obesity with your clients and broach those conversations. A little bit of an intro about Thrive Tribe. I'm not sure if you know about Thrive Tribe itself. You may have come from one of our services and know us more, for example, as a service in Surrey or Lincolnshire or East Sussex or numerous other areas. Thrive Tribe is a specialist provider of health and wellbeing services. We operate in 9 different parts of the country, and amongst other things, we run services to help people manage their weight. We also run other lifestyle services, for example, to help people stop smoking, drink less, eat healthy, all with the view to helping clients improve their lifestyle to in turn improve their health. We work with a number of health professionals across those areas, and we get referrals into our services so that we can then take clients on their own behaviour change journey with the view to helping them not just get healthy, but to thrive. We help people lose weight in a number of ways. We've got different programs in different places. And if you're interested, do check us out. We've got a website. Likewise, we'll be telling you a little bit more later on about some of the areas in which we operate. Final thing before we get going is to say that we'll have some Q&A at the end. If you've got time to stick around towards the end of the session, we'll be answering questions from yourselves. Okay, so without further ado, let's get cracking with our first guest. And I think first of all, we're going to be welcoming Heather. Welcome, Heather.
Hi, can you see and hear me?
I shall now hand over to you to do your presentation.
Okay, wonderful, there we go. Motivation is what gets you started, habit is what keeps you going. And I think this is just so important when we're having conversations about around weight management. So my background is in health behavior change psychology. My research was all around what is the difference between those that can maintain healthy habits long term versus those that go back and relapse into old habits, and how can we help people grow, and interventions around growing their skills, knowledge and confidence to actually maintain healthy lifestyle behaviors long term. And being a behavior change specialist, I like to make terrible dad jokes that I put the work in workshop. And so if anyone has a pen and paper or can open up a Word document today, I'd love you to start thinking about how the questions I'm going to ask today apply to you, apply to your clients, apply to your practice. Ideally, if you can actually workshop them for yourself and how they can apply to you in your life and your own personal habits. It's a really beautiful way of actually looking at how you apply these behavioral changes. And so what I would say is, yeah, we're not here to make hypothetical changes, and behavioral science is all about, turning intentions into actions. So I would say if you want to get the most out of these few minutes that we have together, I would grab a pen and paper. I've actually got a worksheet as well that's just popped into the chat there as well. Again, putting the work in workshop. There is a worksheet there that you can work off the key questions, and you can take them away and practice them in your practice, with your friends and family, wherever it feels most relevant for you. Um, so I think if we can pop on the next slide, I'm not used to not having control of my slides. I think I actually have control. This is wonderful. Okay, there's me in a better her day. Let's see, brilliant. Okay, so I thought I'd start out by talking about habit myths. And you know, there's so many myths that our clients and we face when it comes to actually creating lasting changes in our lives. And you know, what they found in behavioral science is if we can understand more about what it takes to create healthy habits, we're much more likely to be able to stick to them long term. And I love this quote from Lewis Carroll, which is, "If you don't know where you're going, any road can get you there." So how do we know where we're going? I think one of the biggest first myths that people come with, especially in terms of weight loss, is they start with the end in mind. So often when people set out on a weight loss journey, they think about, you know, they let the outcome be the sole indicator of success. They let that number on the scales or, you know, their dress size or their jean size be the indicator of success for them. And what we know from behavioral science is outcomes can only motivate short term. They need extrinsic motivation, they need validation, they need others to say, well done, they need the scales to tell us the right number. And the problem is when it doesn't. And you know, the scales don't always reflect effort. And when someone makes a lot of effort and they get on the scales and it doesn't show them the right number, that's when people can kind of fall off the wagon. They think, well, I'm making all of these efforts, it's very, very difficult, and I'm still not getting there. And often when the scales does tell them the number they want to see, then they often can put themselves under pressure to step it up, step it up, step it up. And they can actually end up self-critiquing their way there. And what they found, even in gold medal athletes, when it comes to extrinsic motivations and achieving numbers-based goals, that when you reach that goal, the joy of it can be fleeting. And like I say, it can be quickly replaced by another goal. And on the other hand, those goals that are formed by clients because they're significantly meaningful. They're not doing it for you, the GP. They're not doing it for you, the healthcare professional. They're not doing it for you, the husband or the wife or the family. They're doing it because it means something to them. Those are the sticky goals. Those are the long-lasting goals. And intrinsic is a beautiful word. It translates to the word called inward in Latin, which means good for the soul. And so that's things like being healthy is important because you want to perform your best at every aspect in your life. You want to have energy. You want to be able to focus with your work. You want to be able to be a positive role model for your children or for your community. And if we can unlock these intrinsic goals within our clients, you know, those things that matter to them most, it's much more motivating long term than the numbers alone. And because they're linked to their higher values, in other words, they're linked to things that matter to you most. They mean so much more than a number. Your self-esteem doesn't literally hang in the balance because you know you're doing this goal for you because of what it gives you back in your life. And so when it comes to staying on track, it's not about willpower. It's about knowing that the goal you have gives you back something extra. By improving your health, you know, it's about asking yourself, well, how do I want to feel? What does this allow me to feel? What does it help me achieve? What type of person does it make me? And instead of chasing this numbers-based fleeting dream, you become more focused. You actually give yourself the patience to experiment with what works for you. You find things that you enjoy more, and your ability to stay on track is enhanced. And that's why I much prefer the phrase, let me see if I can move this slide. No, I can't. Oh, yeah. When your why is big enough, you'll find your how. And that's something that I'm going to talk to you about in a second. How do you find a client's why, or how do you find your own why? If you can think, it'd be wonderful if you can think about a habit that you personally wish to change and keep that in mind as we go through these questions. You'll find your how. And so it's time to kind of steer people away from just focusing on those outcomes, just focusing on numbers. Numbers can be a useful metric, but they're not a one size fits all, and they're not a metric that necessarily works for everyone. Not everyone is motivated when they're not achieving the numbers, and not everyone is motivated when they are achieving the numbers. And in fact, motivated in the right way, in a way that actually is going to lead to sustainable change. Because we can often get, you know, as you'll be aware, we can often get quite quick changes in weight loss very early on. And then clients become used to that and want to see that time and time again. And if the focus is on those numbers, it takes away from actually what engaging in exercise gives them back, what, you know, eating healthy gives them back, what sleeping more gives them back in their life. And so what we need to do is focus less on those extrinsic motivators, those appearance, those performance, those numbers-based outcomes, and focus more on intrinsic motivators, how people are going to feel day to day and what it contributes to their life. Okay, let's move on. Yes, amazing. So another myth that is huge in the fitness industry is this kind of no pain, no gain mantra. And I'm sure you probably felt this yourself. New Year rolls around and you're super motivated. You're going to run every day. You're going to eat no sugar. You're going to save lots of money. You're going to be nice to your other half, patient with your kids. The list goes on. But the more goals we add in, the more we actually take away from the focal goal. And it's the concept in psychology known as goal dilution. And actually, we have a finite amount of willpower. So willpower is similar than a muscle. If I went to the gym for the next 7 days and trained my right bicep, by the time I get to the end of the week, I wouldn't be able to lift up a glass of water. But if I go once a week for 7 weeks, that's much more habit forming. I learn where it fits in my day. I learn where it fits in my life. I learn actually, I have proper rest and recovery in between. I get stronger over time. And the thing is, what people don't realize when it comes to weight loss is that ultimately, those who are most successful at long-term change are those that make the smallest, most gradual and consistent changes over time. Getting to that maintenance phase, it needs to be a gradual process in order for it to be sustainable. It needs to be achieved through consistent, small, but positive changes in your lifestyle. And these changes can be so intentionally tiny that they don't feel punishing or restrictive, and therefore they don't use up too much of our willpower. I like to call them bite-sized habits because I feel like we don't want to bite off more than we can chew. And I think it's really, really important that we don't feel restricted. We don't feel deprived. Again, time and time again in studies, we've seen as soon as those two feelings crop up for people, that's when people start to slide. And a beautiful example of this, I think, is the British cycling team at the 2012 Olympics. They set out to make, 4 years prior to the Olympics, they set out to make 1% changes across sport. So 1%, laughably small in isolation. But actually, cumulatively had a massive impact on their success. So they did things like they brought in surgeons so they could learn proper hand washing techniques to prevent them getting viruses and illnesses. They changed their pillows on their bed so they could sleep better. They looked at different elements of their diet, just adding in one new gradual change a week. This one is hilarious, they even painted the inside of their bike sheds white so they could see any tiny speck of dust that fell on their bikes that could hamper their performance. And basically, almost in isolation, they all seemed laughably small, these changes that they made. But cumulatively, over time, they had a compounding effect. They had the most successful Olympics, the most successful Tour de France of all time. And what I say, is if you're struggling to improve, the problem isn't you, the problem is your system. And if you can create a better system for change, then you can make change happen. And I think these 3 questions are an important way of starting that system with clients. And we'll talk more about the questions just now in a second. But it's important to have a system for change, to not rely on our unreliable willpower, because it's the moment we feel fatigued, the moment we have an argument with our boss, the moment that the kids are stressing us out, that willpower is going to be affected. We need to set up a system that can weather the storm of life so that our habits stay durable, they stay resistant to that. Because the key thing here is habits are formed through context-dependent repetition. Do the same thing in the same circumstance enough times and it becomes a habit. And that's what we want for clients. Motivation will drop off over time, 100%, but habit increases over time if we can get people to repeat things often enough. And that's why it's so important to get them to connect with why it's important to them, and 2, make it as small as possible for them to do, lowering that runway, making it easier to engage. Okay, so let's get into the questions then. Amazing. Yeah, I'm a massive quote lover as well. So this is very important to me. I do a presentation entirely in quotes, but I think that this is a beautiful quote, which is, one of the greatest resources people cannot mobilize themselves is that they try and accomplish great things. Most worthwhile achievements are the result of many little things done in a single direction. And this is so, so important when it comes to habit change. Just checking the chat there, just in case anyone's telling me that they're not. Okay, great. Okay, so let's think about that first myth. So many people think about the outcome. They focus on that number when it comes to weight loss. And how can we reshift that? How can we evoke that intrinsic motivation, that sticky motivation from clients? And maybe you think about a habit that you wanted to establish this year, maybe a New Year's resolution or anything that's quite important to you right now. Maybe it's create more work-life balance or whatever it happens to be for you. Or you might want to think of a client. I want you to think about this habit. I want you to write that down first, or that lifestyle change that client wants to create. And I want you to think about either what's your or what could be their why for that. And what I mean by that is, why is it important to create that change? Why are you doing this in the first place? Oh.
Heather, sorry.
Yeah.
Just mute it. Heather,
Hello.
sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I don't think the slides are keeping up.
Oh, okay.
Could you just tell us what slides you want on so that we can change them for everyone else? I don't think you changing them is changing them for everyone else.
Okay, I'm on slide 7, but it really doesn't matter actually. Like, don't, yeah, and we can send this to people afterwards. So please don't worry at all. If you can't, just listen along as well. I don't want to hold anyone up. I know that you guys are probably very, very busy. The slides are very simple, and it's just me and my quote obsession. So again, please don't worry. But there is a link, and I'll just ask if the girls post it again. Steph, if you don't mind, in the chat to a document that has these 3 questions on it, and you can take that resource and use it again and again. But the first question is really, why is it important for you to create that change, or why is it important to the client to create that change? And that's all about trying to channel this intrinsic motivation. What does it mean for them to form this habit? And this can be anything at all, but it needs to be true to them. So, is it to achieve their potential at work? Is it to be a great parent or a grandparent? Is it to feel healthier and more confident in themselves? Is it to be a leader in their field? Is it just to stay in a positive mindset? Is it to feel more productive at work or at home? Is it to reduce the burden on their family? And basically, we want to know, how do people want to feel by being healthy? What do they want to achieve by being healthy? What type of person does it make them by engaging with health? And this helps us unlock or understand a little bit more about that intrinsic motivation. And I often say, okay, how do we do this? We can ask people why. So for example, often people say to me, okay, well, I want to get 10,000 steps on my fitness tracker day. Why is that important to you? Because, getting 10,000 steps is a sign of being healthy, and it's just a way to maintain my weight. Why is that important to you? Well, I want to have more energy. I want to lose more weight. I want to have more energy. Why is that important to you? Because actually, when I have more energy, I'm better able to apply myself at work. I'm actually better able to help out at home. I tend to, feel more confident in myself. And you can see, the more you ask someone why, the more likely you are to get to that true intrinsic why. Why is health important? What does it give you back? And it's all about the contribution that it makes that person's life. That could only take, 30, 60, 90 seconds max. Asking why often enough, we can get to that true intrinsic motivation. So we're moving away. It no longer becomes about getting 10,000 steps on the fitness tracker. It becomes, actually, this allows me to do so much more in my life. This allows me to be the person that I want to be in life. This allows me to be the parent or the role model at work or the role model in my community. It's about the contribution that being healthy gives you, rather than what it takes away, or rather than focusing on that number alone. And those are the goals that are much more sticky. So the first question is, why is it important to create that change? The second question to ask someone is, what's the smallest change they can make in pursuit of like that lifestyle change, be it to change their diet, be it to sleep more, be it to exercise more, be it to meditate more, whatever it happens to be, whatever's relevant for them, whatever goal they choose to start with. And again, choosing a goal, supporting autonomy, asking what's the one change they wish to make over the next week. So we're taking the goals out of these, putting them into their lives. What's the one change? And interesting, the research shows, as I said before, smaller, simpler actions become habitual more quickly. So instead of trying to do everything at once, making one goal and doing that consistently can be really, really effective at creating habits. And so, there's really interesting research from UCL where they looked at creating tooth flossing habits. And they got one group of participants to floss, they just told them to floss as much as they could. And the second group of participants, they told them to floss one tooth every night. Now, when they followed up 3 months later, it was the 1-tooth group that were much more successful engaging in their flossing habits. Again, laughably small. I often say, if it doesn't pass the Google test, it might not be small enough. Laughably small. But because 1 tooth was so simple, they were much more likely to engage with it. And so then they showed up to the tooth flossing party. They thought, well, I might as well keep going. And that's the thing. We want to make the runway so small. And there's another benefit of this. It gives people a positive self-esteem boost and a positive dopamine boost. So often what we think is going to be effective for habit change, giving up something, cutting out something, not doing something, it doesn't actually create that positive response in our brain. It doesn't actually create that boost of learning a new skill, or that confidence of learning a new skill, or that self-esteem, like self-esteem boost from learning a new skill. But small changes do. Things like planning a healthy snack to avoid the biscuit slump at 4 p.m., or switching to a smaller size coffee because you get the jitters in the afternoon if you have too many coffees, or taking the stairs in work, whatever it happens to be. They might feel like insignificantly small changes, but cumulatively they can have a big impact on long-term success. And the thing is, they don't feel punishing or restrictive. They feel easy. You feel confident. You feel confident. And that's how you gain momentum. And remember what I said about habits increase over time, motivation decreases over time. So you want to keep consistently engaging in those habits. And so those small changes are what get people to consistently engage. And as cheesy as it sounds, success and habit change is determined by the journey rather than the destination. It's what you do each day to work towards your goal. And by setting too high a goal or trying to do too much at once, essentially you're setting yourself up for failure. When we get clients to set small goals, just one small change that week, each time they accomplish it, they get a sense of satisfaction from the process, and that spurs them on to stick with them. And how do you know if that goal is small enough? Here's another great question to ask. How confident are you between this time and next week, on a scale of 1 to 10? How confident are you that you'll still be executing on this goal? So asking people, how confident do you feel in actually, carrying this out for the next week? Think about your week ahead, what's coming up for you, how confident do you feel? If it's anything but less than a 7 or 70% confident, we need to make it easier for people. So maybe they said they were going to meditate every day for 10 minutes. Maybe it's every other day, or maybe it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And maybe it's not 20 minutes, maybe it's 10 minutes. Maybe it's just 2 minutes while the kettle boils in the morning, or while they're waiting for the kids in the car, whatever is relevant to their life. The key here is that we're actually giving people a positive runway to success. It avoids that no pain or all or nothing mantras that we described earlier. They're not setting themselves up for failure. They're setting themselves up for something achievable. And each time they get that positive boost. If you want us to take this further, you can ask people, how confident are you that your most exhausted or fatigued self will still be carrying this out a week from now? What would make it easier on that person? How do we be our future selves' best friend? How do we support that person to make it easier in their lives? And if they are 70% confident, what's it going to take for them to get to 100%? What do they need to set up? What conditions need to be in place? It's a very, very helpful question. So one small change over the next week, and how confident are you that you'll still be executing on that this week, like a week from now, over the next 7 days? And how can you make that easier for yourself? Okay, and the final step then is to put the bite-sized habit in context. So instead of the goals kind of being wishy-washy, exercise more, get fit, eat better, we want to take them out of the esoteric and put them into the concrete of the day, of our clients' day-to-day lives. So, habits are formed through context-dependent repetition. So do things in the same time, in the same context each day. It firmly establishes a part of your routine. Your context can be any cue. It could be when I get to my desk. It can be after breakfast, when you finish lunch, when you open your computer. It could be when a reminder goes off on your phone. But basically, hundreds of studies have shown that people who explicitly state when and where their new behaviors are going to happen are more likely to stick to their goals. So instead of exercising more, it becomes, if it's Monday or Wednesday, I do an online class at 7 a.m. Instead of eat better, it changes to, if it's 6 p.m. on Sunday night, I'll cook some healthy dinners for the week, or prepare some healthy snacks for the week. And you get specific on that. What are those healthy snacks? But ultimately, what we found in studies is, there's a really interesting study in the British Journal of Psychology on this, where they looked at exercise habits. And one group focused on motivation around exercise. So they read motivational materials, they looked at motivational videos, and another group specified when and where they would exercise that week. The motivation group were 36% more likely to engage in exercise over the following week. The when and where group were 91% more likely to follow through, to turn those intentions into action. And so a question for any client that's trying to make a lifestyle change is, when and where is that going to show up for you over the next week? Because people have complex lives, they have lots going on. And what we don't want to do is shoehorn habits into their existing lives. We want to actually help habits show up in what they already do. By asking when and where, it helps them brainstorm, helps them understand what barriers they have to overcome, how they can actually engage in a way that actually is going to support their lifestyle. So, for example, it might be that, let's take the example of meditating more. A lot of people think, okay, well, we need to meditate in the morning. But what if you're trying to get the kids out the door to work or to school? That's a stressful time. Maybe that's not the time to meditate. Maybe it's just before your lunch break or when you sit down at your computer after lunch. Maybe, they're thinking about, exercising more, and what they hear is everyone's running, and running is the thing to do. But maybe you don't live near somewhere where actually it feels safe to run at the time that's relevant for you. Maybe it's about thinking about a different place. And what I mean by this is, when and where helps you think, okay, is this habit going to be useful in my life? Maybe there's an alternative option. And then it helps you brainstorm where it fits in your life, instead of having to wedge it in. So just to recap, 3 key questions. Why is it important to create this change in your life? What does it give you back in your life? You and you alone as the individual. That helps unlock that intrinsic motivation, that sticky motivation that we know is important for long-term change. What we know in weight loss, from the weight loss studies, is focusing on the number is going to lead to, it throws people off track. Those people that focus on the numbers alone are unsuccessful long-term. Those people that focus on what being healthy gives them back in their lives and they create an identity around that, those are the people that stick with it. They also prime their brains to actually receive those particular rewards that they get from, engaging in exercise, engaging in healthy eating, engaging in better sleep practices. Really, really interesting neuroscience around that. The second question is, what's the smallest change you can make over this week? And if you want to, you can scale that, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you're still going to be carrying out? Or how confident are you that your most exhausted self will still be carrying out? And if you're not at least 70% confident, you need to make it easier. And the final question is, when and where are you going to perform this small change over the next week? And the key thing here is to ask them to revise that a week later. What worked well, what didn't, what do you want to adjust? Because habits need to be looked at as an experiment. Habits are for life, not just for January. And I think that's really important for people to keep in mind. And so, any habit that we're adopting, we want to think about, that we want to adopt this for the rest of our lives. And so we need to give ourselves permission to experiment, to try things on, so that we know what the right fit for us is. And needless to say, clients will have more than one habit that they wish to change. And the key with this blueprint is that this helps them understand, okay, if they're bringing in a new habit, maybe they want to bring in a new habit every week or every other week. Are they going to be able to manage it alongside everything? Are they at least 70% confident or more? And I think that the key thing here is that these habits are driven by this intrinsic motivation, that they know why it's important for them, what it gives them back in their life. So I hope that this has sparked some ideas or some motivation. And if you take away one thing, I would say start small, start teeny tiny. That helps, clients gain momentum over time without using their willpower. And if they're struggling to improve, the problem isn't you, the problem is their system. And if we can support them with a system for change, we can make change happen. And this toolkit that we've popped on the chat, and this document will help support clients with those tools. And these are questions that you can experiment with in your own practice. And I don't know if we're able to get to the final slide. There's a lovely quote on there that I'd love to finish with if we can at all. I don't think it's moving for people now. If I can, I think I remember what it was, but we make our habits, then our habits make us. And I think that's really, really important, that we make habits that serve us in our lives. And when we're supporting clients, we have to understand how the habit serves them, because otherwise, why would they be engaged to continue with it long term? So I'm going to hang on for questions afterwards as well, if anyone has. I've seen one or two questions pop up in the chat, but I'm going to pass you back to Tim or Richard, whoever's going to come next. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thanks so much, Heather. I hope everyone found that really interesting, applying a very scientific and evidence-based approach to how people can change their behaviours. I'm aware that for some of you there were issues with the slides and the sound, but we have recorded the session and we will make sure that anyone gets access to that so that you can see it again if it weren't working for you then. So thanks so much, Heather. We'll be doing questions at the end, but first of all, we are going to bring in Dr. Richard Pyle, who's not only Thrive Tribe's lead GP, but also a practicing GP who specialises in lifestyle medicine. So Richard is going to give you the GP take on things. So over to you, Richard.
Yeah, so I just thought I'd start by introducing myself, and thank you, Heather, as well. Always great to get the benefit of your expertise in the area of behavioural change and the psychology behind that. I'm a GP in Hertfordshire. I work for 6 sessions a week, still full clinical sessions as a GP. I also do a bit of commissioning, a bit of lifestyle medicine, work with Thrive Tribe, a bit of appraising, 1 or 2 other bits and pieces. So I just thought it was important to emphasise that, because one of my things I'm really passionate about is ensuring that we take the principles of the kind of topic we've just been discussing and looking at how we apply them in real life. I don't know about you, but some of the people that I follow, say on social media or who do podcasts or books or whatever, that they may well be medical doctors, but not all of them are actually still doing any medical doctoring. And I think it's important, for authenticity, that we can talk about what that means in real life. Now, we often get told what to do as GPs, and I've often heard it said by frustrated people who work for PCTs and CCGs that trying to get GPs to do anything is like herding cats. And according to a personality inventory that I did recently, I'm apparently both a questioner and a rebel. So I think one of the important things we should think about is, before we get too much into how we do something or what we do, is the question really of why we're doing it. Could I have the next slide, please? So I'm not going to be too preachy, but I am going to go there a little bit before we move on to the pragmatism. And then hopefully overall you'll find it helpful and a pragmatic approach. So one of my big issues as a GP is that our medical model, and including in that the GP consultation, is essentially a disease-based and broken one. And if any of you have read my book, you will have probably read me ranting on about it. And it's how we were trained in medical school. We wait for people to get sick. We then hopefully identify their symptoms, and then we try to fix them with a variety of interventions, often based on drugs or procedures of some kind. The patient bears varying degrees of responsibility for that, from some to none. And it's a model which doesn't work and never really has done. And yet, despite that, it's the model that many of us have been trained with. And I found myself increasingly frustrated as a GP because of that, both at work and also recognizing how it didn't work for me in my own life and our family's challenges with health, etc. So I started to explore much more issues around what it means to be really well and looking at lifestyle medicine. And the question is, why don't we bring up lifestyle, particularly weight, more in the consultation? Now, there are some obvious answers to this, aren't there? There are multiple agendas. The little clinical, our different clinical systems have got little boxes coming up telling us about all the different things that we haven't done and need to do, and things that need ticking and checking off. And that's, never mind, that's before the poor patient brings up the reason that maybe they've rung us or they're sitting in front of us. And their agenda may well be not at all obviously connected to perhaps some of the issues that we are concerned about for them. And we've only got 10, 15 minutes, maybe less if you're in a busy emergency surgery, and you have to be pragmatic about what you can achieve. But nonetheless, I think there are opportunities that we do get. And a slightly concerning statistic is that apparently 80% of obese patients claim, when asked, that their doctor has never raised the issue of weight with them. Now, again, I know as a GP, some of you are thinking, really? I find that statistic a little bit hard to believe. And I'm not sure it is 80%, because I did have a chat with a patient within the last year, and I said to them, has anyone ever talked to you about your weight? And they went, no, doctor, not once. And I look back in the notes and they'd had 6 consultations in 4 years. But nonetheless, it's something that we don't bring up, hence my choice of the perhaps politically incorrect slide. It's something that we don't always want to bring up. It either might not be on the patient's agenda, or it could be something that we're worried is going to upset them. And some of my colleagues do say to me, I'm a GP, I'm a highly expensively skilled, trained person. I'm not the person to bring up their weight, etc. Is it the case of between you and the patient, it's the wrong person, the wrong place, and the wrong time? And then other people might think, well, actually, I've got a load of evidence-based medicine that I have to practice, and talking to patients about their weight is not really the best use of my time. So I wanted to just explore that a little bit more and talk about what it really means to practice meaningful evidence-based medicine. And to use that, I want to illustrate the concept of numbers needed to treat. So could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So here are some numbers needed to treat. Now, most of you, I should imagine, are familiar with this. Just to recap very briefly, it's the idea that you take the study data, which talks about an intervention and whether it worked or not, and if so, how well, and basically comes down to how many people need to have a particular intervention for something either not to happen or for the outcome that you want to happen. And I find that's a really good way of boiling down a lot of the complex studies that we're often presented with, and we're all scratching our heads trying to understand what the stats actually mean. So again, you may well be familiar with these, but let's just go through them. So statins for 5 years for primary prevention. So giving statins to people who've never had a heart attack or a stroke. How many people do you have to treat to prevent one heart attack, which incidentally will not kill them on average? The answer is 104. That's a lot. If you gave an antibiotic to someone and said there's a less than 1 in 100 chance this will work, I suspect you wouldn't have many takers. How many people do you need to treat to prevent a stroke? You've never had one. 154. Slightly disappointingly, the numbers needed to harm, conversely, is only 50 to cause a case of diabetes in this group, and possibly as low as 10 for muscle damage. And yet we seem quite happy to do this. This is evidence-based medicine. This is nice guidance. This is stuff that we get chased up and we have to tick boxes for. Aspirin after an acute stroke, we think of that as a no-brainer. You have to give 80 people aspirin after an acute stroke to prevent death and 140 to prevent recurrence. And interestingly, 80 is a very similar NNT for giving people a statin for secondary prevention. So even people who've had a heart attack, you have to treat 80 of them for one person not to have another heart attack. And yet we're happy to spend our time talking about this and chasing this up. Primary prevention of cardiovascular events in mild hypertension. You don't prevent cardiovascular events by treating mild hypertension, by which you mean a systolic of up to 160 and a diastolic of up to 100. And in fact, the number needed to harm through hypotension and renal impairment, etc., is 12. So again, slightly at odds with what we get paid to do in the QOF. And yet, if we move away from these things that we would probably say this is medicine, this is what we're trained to do as doctors, and we move more into the area of lifestyle, you only have to have 61 people to have a Mediterranean diet for 5 years for primary prevention of a stroke, a heart attack, or death. Well, that's considerably better than the statins. If you want to get even more impressive numbers, even lower NNTs, then let's look at the weight loss intervention to prevent major morbidity. It's 7 people need to lose weight to prevent diabetes, 13 to avoid becoming hypertensive, 14 to avoid becoming disabled. And if you look at the intensive low-calorie diets, which are potentially controversial, but some of the evidence does support their use, perhaps in selected people, perhaps short-term, for preventing type 2 diabetes. If you've had diabetes for 8 years or more, you only need to have 2 people go on a very low-calorie diet for one of them to go into remission. And if you've only had diabetes for less than 4 years, it's almost as little as 1. So these are all things that are worth considering, that maybe we should be focusing on this more and not perhaps worrying quite so much about marginal tweaks to people's blood pressure and their cholesterol levels. Next slide, please. So this, of course, is our traditional approach. That's the preachy bit over, by the way. This is our traditional approach to medicine, which may well be received with varying degrees of enthusiasm. So I have been tempted to try. I have tried the shock and awe approach sometimes over the years, which is more the second picture here, with the person asking, what fits your busy schedule better, exercising 1 hour a day or being dead 24 hours a day? And we can all think of a patient for whom that was the turning point, perhaps. But in reality, it's rarely the case. And so the question is, how can we shift the needle? How can we improve the odds for the patient, whom, after all, we are trying to serve in having these conversations? Next slide, please. So I would argue that potentially, rather than being the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time, you're actually the right person in the right place at the right time if you do it smartly. So, you know, asking yourself the question, is the person sitting in front of you in a place where, because of the conversation you just had, now might be the time, even just to start the conversation by asking a question? And if they're not in the right place at the right time, because there are other priorities that you have and that they have, you know, can you get them back on another occasion, either to see you or to talk to your healthcare assistant or health coach or whoever? Because if we would ultimately give a double appointment to someone who'd just been diagnosed with cancer, or someone with serious mental health problems, or let's face it, the 300 appointments a year that one of the practice frequent flyers has, which achieves absolutely nothing, you know, then surely we should be thinking about whether we can help a person now take preventative action, which is going to stand them instead for years and benefit them, the NHS, you, everybody. Think about language as well. I do sometimes use the word obesity, possibly in a context where I feel that's helpful. Perhaps a lot of people would prefer not to use that word, or say they don't like the word, but you can always share facts. You know, most of your clinical systems, I would imagine, will have a capability of showing a graph. You can't deny the figures that show the weight or the BMI over the years. And of course, you can ask open questions when it comes to talking about a person's weight. So it could be, you know, have you ever had any concerns about your health as a result of your weight? Has anyone ever spoken to you about it before? Are there things that you've tried that you found really helpful? Or probably equally importantly, if not more so, are there things you've tried that maybe weren't helpful or were difficult? One of the questions that, incidentally, on the chat talked about the exploration of existing habits and how successful that is for effective change. I think there is a do not pass go point in a consultation with a person who's really struggling with weight, where if it becomes apparent that there are deep-seated psychological issues, and after all, for many people, obesity is simply an external sign of pain, usually related to things like adverse events in childhood, that might be where you stop. You know, there might be a place to still talk about habits, because pragmatically, just like you have cognitive behavioral therapy to help a person overcome their difficulties, which may stem back to a long time ago, there may still be a place for behavior change, but also there might be a, right, let's get you referred to the counsellor and talk about the problem that you have before we then come back and start talking about, you know, food groups and calories, etc. But exploring the pain can be helpful, because helping them establish that actually they do have a need, that you could potentially be in a position to point them in the right direction, and considering the benefits that there may well be to leading a healthier life, as Heather has talked about, asking the why questions, why, drilling down and looking at the extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. You know, for some people, measuring numbers can be helpful. For someone like me, a middle-aged, white, quantifiable selfer who wears an Apple Watch, that can be, at least in the short term, that can be quite helpful. But the deeper intrinsic motivation, the really why this is important to me in life, is going to make for more sustainable change. And it's just starting one bit at a time. You know, I've got my second elephant picture here, even more politically incorrectly, but it's just making the point that, you know, you eat the elephant one bite at a time. You are there to prime the person and to maybe help them to start to plan. They may, like the smoker who's not yet ready to quit, it could be your conversation, someone that they trust, someone who knows their history, someone that has their medical record in front of them, will start them down that path, which they may well complete with someone else. And probably they should complete with someone else, because we don't work for Weight Watchers, we're not all counsellors, but we can start them in the right place. And planning as well as priming. There's thinking about planning, making a plan, both in my NHS and non-NHS roles. I try to help people, if they can just put it down on a piece of paper. You could have a template that you run from EMIS or System 1, which essentially might say, you know, what is the goal that I want to achieve? What are the steps that I'm going to take to achieve it? How specifically am I going to achieve those steps? What might get in the way that I could plan to get around? Who's going to help me? Making ourselves accountable, appointing referees to help us if we're willing, can be helpful. How will I know when I've achieved it? It's much easier to go for something which is measurable than intangible. And if you have the time, or again, passing them on to the social prescriber or the health coach who might be able to do that. And that's where it's really important to use the primary care team, because it may be that the conversation ends with an agreement that they will be referred to the local tier 2 service provided by Thrive Tribe, that they will get exercise on referral. But you don't need to do that. You could have an administrator in your practice that does it. You could just say, fire off an email or a task to the person who's going to get that done. And of course, as I understand it, most, if not all, tier 2 weight management services, certainly I think the ones offered by Thrive Tribe, there is a self-referral route as well. The only question there perhaps is, the patient, how likely are they to do that? Do they need a little bit of an extra kick or push or nudge, in which case you could always potentially get someone else to do it. And I would conclude on this slide just by saying that actually focusing on weight for me is the wrong thing. The question is, what's your life like? How much do you enjoy it? What's your health and well-being like? Would you like to be healthier? How might you achieve that and live life better? And for me, weight loss is a happy coincidental side effect as a result of that, because when you sleep better and you're more physically active and you eat better and you have better relationships and you're better at dealing with stress and you've considered your meaning and your purpose in life, and I do believe that last one, is, along with connection, is probably two of the most important things, then ultimately a healthy weight is more likely to follow. Could we have the next slide, please? So very briefly, just some case studies to whip through. These were about a third of the ones that I recorded in the year 18 to 19 before COVID hit and everything went pear-shaped. And there are certain themes that you'll see throughout this. So yes, obviously weight loss is key for many people to, for example, reversing their hypertension or their diabetes. Physical activity certainly helps, although isn't a massive contributor to weight loss, but that has other physical and particularly mental health benefits. Alcohol reduction and improved sleep is really important. Those of you who've been on Rangan Chatterjee and Ian Panj's Prescribing Lifestyle Medicine course will have seen the case studies where actually the person who reversed their pre-diabetes didn't lose weight. They had to change from burnouts at the gym to yoga and getting a better night's sleep and improving their working arrangements. And that was how they reversed their pre-diabetes. You can refer people obviously through the National Diabetes Prevention Programme. Again, not work that you have to do, but that may well help. I do find that low carbohydrate diets probably help people with pre-diabetes and diabetes more than other kinds of diet, but I am very open to other sorts of diet as well. Going more plant-based generally is a good idea. A 65-year-old patient who'd had a cabbage and then developed pre-diabetes got referred to the NDPP, big reduction in HbA1c, and has now done 26 park runs. The last patient, who's one of my younger ones, is off the meds a year later. So this is not because I waved a magic wand over them, but these are conversations that I recorded at the time. We had a chat. Some of them went away and did this all by themselves. Some of them did it through weight loss management programs. But these are real tangible examples. And these are not every day. Pick your winners. Go for people that you think are interested in behavior change. Be ruthless about it. Don't waste time on people that aren't. And there's no point. Once you've primed them, leave them to go and do what they want to do. But if you think about it, all of these patients, think about over the years how much time and effort and ill health and prescribing budget, etc., will be saved by doing that. And I think that is the last slide. So, no, one more slide. Sorry, last one. There we go. So in conclusion, it is the right thing to do. You do have to do it smartly. I'm not unrealistic. I don't do it for every patient, every surgery. But it's a better use of our time than many of the other things that we do, which I think comes as a bit of a shock to people who haven't really thought more about the evidence in lifestyle medicine. Primary care is the right place to do it, although it doesn't always have to be a GP. We are sometimes, however, the best placed people to do it. The trick is picking the right person, time and place to do it. We can use other people to do it. And ultimately, it is the patient's choice. You give them the information, you give them the support. It's not your job to take every step through with them. But we can ultimately help people to do it more successfully. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for that very practical presentation. Hope you all found that useful. Now, what we're going to do now in a second is have Richard and Heather join us for some Q&A, if any of you've got any questions. And we appreciate it's nearing the end of the session, but we'll crack on a bit longer if you're happy to stay around. First of all, we talked a little bit there around Tier 2 weight management services. Tier 2 weight management services are basically normally approximately 12-week programs where people are supported to lose some weight. And Thrive Tribe provides Tier 2 services in several areas, and most of you have been invited to this webinar because you work in an area we operate, but not all of you. So I'm just going to quickly share a list of what our local services are. So if you do work in one of our areas, you know who to refer to. So give me 2 secs and I will share a slide. After this, we'll do some Q&A. Hopefully everyone can see that. So if you work in Lincolnshire, our service is called One New Lincolnshire. If you work in Oxfordshire, we are called Achieve Oxfordshire. In Surrey, One New Surrey. East Sussex, One New East Sussex. In Westminster, One New Westminster. One New Kensington and Chelsea. And in Hammersmith and Fulham, Windsor and Maidenhead, Thurrock and South Gloucestershire, we have a digital-only programme called Glogy. So if you work in any of those areas, you have these services for free in your area that you can refer into. If you don't work in one of these areas, you probably will have a service locally, but you'll probably need to do some digging to find out where it is. We very rarely have waiting lists for programs, ironically, so please do find out how to refer into your program if you're not already referring. Another quick bit of information, if you work in any of these areas, Lincolnshire, Surrey, East Sussex or London, we have localised webinars where you can find out more about what happens in your area and referral routes and all that sort of thing. These are the dates. We'll obviously be sharing information about those local webinars to those of you that work in those areas. We're going to put links to the webinars in the chat as well. Okay, right, so if any of you have any questions, please pop them in the chat and we will do our best to answer them. I shall try and share the questions that pop through, and hopefully, I know Richard's there, hopefully Heather is still around too. We also have our Thrive Tribe lead dietitian on hand if any of the subjects are more dietetic in nature. Just to reiterate as well, anyone that couldn't hear or got here late or didn't attend, we've recorded the session and we will share the recording and the slides. So please do feel free to ask questions in the chat. Okay, first one. What is it about a Mediterranean diet that works so well? That's a question from Sarah Thornton. We start off with Richard, and I've got our dietitian Heather Osborne here if needed, but do you want to start, Richard?
I'll give it a go, and then Heather can correct me if I've got any of it wrong. It's an interesting thing. A Mediterranean diet sometimes is more than just a diet. Obviously, it can be a whole lifestyle, but crudely speaking, I think with the Mediterranean diet, it's often a predominantly plant-based diet, not exclusively. But it was Michael Pollan who wrote for the New York Times when asked what's the best diet you can eat. He wrote 7 words that made him famous. He said, eat plants, eat food, mainly plants, not too much. And so it's often a plant-based diet, but it's also got things like good fats in it, nuts, seeds, oily fish, bit of meat. And so that's really an optimal diet full of antioxidants, for example, and other benefits. And not only is it good for the things like reducing heart disease, etc., but in the SMILES trial in Australia, where they took people with moderate to severe depression who were already on treatment, the numbers needed to treat to get into remission for depression on the Mediterranean diet, on a modified Mediterranean diet, was 4, which any drug company would kill to be able to claim. So it has multiple benefits. So yeah, worth looking into a bit more. I don't know if Heather wants to add anything on top of that.
I'm just going to bring Heather, our dietitian, in. What's the dietetic reasons the Mediterranean diet is good for you?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with everything that Richard said there. Obviously, high intake of fish as well. So in terms of the benefits of having additional omega-3 in the diet, and tends to be based towards a slightly lower meat content than maybe in sort of a westernized diet. I think also the fact that often the Mediterranean diet is based much more around less processed foods, so cooking foods from scratch, less reliant on kind of highly processed foods, which might have things like trans fats in, high in sugar, those type of foods that maybe many of our clients and patients that we're seeing are quite reliant on. So sort of a move away from that heavily processed diet and back to much more sort of natural ingredients, high in fruit and vegetables. Obviously having a diet in things like fruit, veg, oily fish, you're going to be getting the antioxidants in there as well. So I think it's just generally much higher in those type of foods that be encouraging people to eat on a daily basis.
Thanks, Heather. Got another question. Dr. Pearl, you mentioned that very low carb diets are good for pre-diabetes and diabetes. What does the dietitian think about this? There's a bit of controversy about this in the dietetic world, but we're talking specifically about pre-diabetes and diabetes here. Views on that for a very low carb diet?
Yeah, well, was it very low calorie diet, or very low carbohydrate diet you mentioned, Richard?
Very low calorie diet was
very
the
low
evidence I was quoting. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, very low calorie diet.
Yeah, so in terms of the very low calorie diets, that tends to be where people who maybe struggled with their weight for a long period of time would be prescribed to be placed on usually a liquid diet that's based somewhere around 800 calories a day. So it tends to be a shake-based diet that people are following. And although this isn't something that's very easy to adhere to, very easy to follow, and something that can be done, I would say, without quite a lot of supervision, equally in patients where maybe they've struggled for years with their weight, the type of patients you might come across who sort of say, I can't lose weight, I've tried everything, it's my metabolism. Sometimes using something like a very low calorie diet under supervision enables them to see that actually by following this type of diet, they actually can lose weight, and it then can often give them the motivation then to continue to do it. And you do get very good weight loss results with the very low calorie diet, and you can definitely start to see things like a reversal in people having pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes. So you can get some really good results with it that, like Richard was talking about, maybe more impressive results than when using tablets or medication, but it does need to be done under medical or dietetic guidance. It's not easy to adhere to, and the thing that's probably the most tricky bit is then the re-establishment of trying to get somebody back onto eating more normally once they've finished the low calorie diet. So then working with them to make sure that they are changing those habits for longer term change, rather than just following low calorie diets as kind of a quick fix or a crash diet. So I think if the support is in place and it's the right client, it can work really well, but it's definitely not something that we would be using across the board for everybody. Richard, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, so I agree with everything you've said, Heather. Be awkward if I didn't, wouldn't it? Anyway, no, I do. And I'd just like to add, yeah, absolutely. It's not my favourite choice. I think for some people, to start them off down the right route, if they can transition it may have a place. I think we should be open to that for some people in the way that other people enjoy other sorts of extreme diets. It's not sustainable. It isn't natural. So it isn't for the long term. And the other comment I made was about that's perhaps useful for reversal of diabetes. For pre-diabetes, I would probably advocate a more moderate approach. So I am a believer in a lower carbohydrate diet. I appreciate that it doesn't work for everybody, but on balance, having done a review for Thrive Tribe on the evidence, and now it is recommended nationally. It is an option that, for example, Diabetes UK offer you advice on. Carbohydrates are generally inflammatory, pro-inflammatory. You can measure that in the blood. A pro-inflammatory diet is going to cause your body to be inflamed. carbohydrates that we think of as not necessarily sugary, like pasta and rice, which of course have been traditionally part of the NHS Eat Well plate, end up causing as big a glycemic problem as do the sweet and sugary foods, if not more. So I tend to advocate a lower carb diet. I think it's always best to avoid extremes if you can. It's like people saying, I only eat, I'm a carnivore, I'm a vegan. Sorry, any vegans on the call. I'm a very low carb diet, I'm a whatever. I think for most people, it needs to be something that's sustainable and moderate. And that's the message that you should get from someone supporting you to lose weight. Because I think in the long term, that's the only way of doing it.
Thanks. And Heather, probably worth getting your take on low carb rather than low calorie diets for people with pre-diabetes or diabetics.
Yeah, so like Richard said, the low carb diets are definitely something that is being used, particularly pre-diabetes, and getting, again, very good results. And like Richard said, it's something that we've explored using within Thrive Tribe for some of our clients, because again, I think if people can make those changes to their diet and cutting down on some of the carbohydrates, again, where people might have traditionally been eating quite a lot of those foods, big portions of those foods, by making changes to reduce their intake of those foods, you can definitely start to see clinical improvements. So yeah, I think it's often just kind of taking an initial look at what somebody's eating, seeing where improvements can be made, and then sort of pointing them in the right direction depending on what's going to work for them and what's going to be something that they can adhere to as well.
Thank you. Right, Heather McKee, I'm going to line you up for the next one, which is, how can you motivate someone who is wheelchair bound and diabetic to lose weight? Quite a tough question to answer, Heather, but do you fancy giving that one a go?
Yeah, absolutely. The exact same reason, the way you would motivate anyone. I don't think that those circumstances should make. Yes, you've got different barriers, but every individual has different barriers that they're facing. And so what I would say was, again, help them find their why, what it gives them back, how does it help them in their lives. Acknowledge the difficulty of change, acknowledge the difficulty of barriers. I think that's something that we need to do a lot as practitioners, and then actually what they found in studies is having that empathy, having that acknowledgement of the difficulty, and also supporting people to find, the joy and the benefits and what it contributes to their life in terms of healthy habits will help them actually overcome those barriers. So there's two things there: acknowledging the difficulties that they have and the barriers that they face, and helping them understand that actually, learning more about their health, becoming healthier, what it actually gives them back in their life rather than what it takes away.
Richard, have you had any examples of wheelchair-bound patients that have improved their lifestyle?
I've certainly had examples of patients who you could argue outwardly we feel that they have potentially quite a low quality of life because of the problems they've got with disease and disability. But I would echo Heather's comments in that we might be making assumptions about that which are unfair, and there is still potentially room for them to improve. And the thing that's good to remember about someone who's, say, wheelchair bound, for example, or let's make it a slightly less extreme, the person who say that they've got really bad knees so they couldn't possibly do any exercise, doc. The good news is that significant weight loss is achievable mainly through what you are eating, not so much your levels of physical activity. So I always encourage people to consider that, no matter how physically disabled a person is, there is always something that they can do. And I think trying to hook onto whatever improvement would matter to them in their life, if there is a link between the food they're eating and the way they're living their life to that improvement, and that's what you need to aim for. It's a question of finding what matters to them, because if it doesn't matter to them, or they've decided that it's too late now and nothing they'll do will make any difference, you could argue they're the person that perhaps you shouldn't be spending an awful lot of time on, to be blunt.
What we found a lot in our services is peer support's really important, and finding a peer group for someone. I know a lot of the sports partnerships in all of the areas we operate often run specialist programs for people with certain physical disabilities, and they're a great focal point to get people engaged with other similar people facing similar challenges, to sort of prove that things are possible and get them involved in peer groups and social and physical activities with other people with similar disabilities. So definitely worth looking out for those programs locally. Next question. What tips do you have for those who insist that their weight doesn't matter to them, but we can see the problems coming down the track? Likewise, people that have high cholesterol, but opposing dietary recommendations. So I guess this is people whether the lifestyle will suggest their health is going to decline, but perhaps the health hasn't quite declined yet. One for you, Richard, first of all.
Yeah, I mean, that's always a challenge, isn't it? Because people are often more motivated by pain and by the threat of loss than they are by being offered an incentive or an extra thing that they don't have. And if they don't anticipate any pain, if they can't see a problem, then that they might be harder to motivate. The loss thing could work in that you could talk about honestly with them about the risks of them, say, developing diabetes and talking about the complications of diabetes that might occur as a result, and that might interest them enough to sort of start having a further conversation. It's sometimes it's worth having a conversation with people about the fact that as humans we're not terribly logical, and that we seem to believe that past performance predicts future. So if we are in our 20s, 30s, 40s, maybe 50s and haven't had any major health problems, we always assume we're not going to have them. And it's probably just worth calling that out and saying, actually, look around you, look at your friends, look at your relatives, look at, that's not the case. And considering it's a bit of a time travel thing, but considering, what their future self might thank them for, if you're 80 years old with diabetes and blood pressure, what would you say to your 30 or 40 or 50-year-old self now? It's that question of talking around deferred gratification and the idea that you can make decisions in the longer term. But I think I'd be interested to see what Heather has to say about that as well.
I think that's Heather. McKee, are you able to add anything to this one?
Yeah, I think what Richard said was wonderful, and I also think if that individual is concerned, you could ask them, why, I suppose if they came for a lifestyle consultation, what motivated them to show up today, and it might be that they say, my children are concerned, and you could start to evoke from them, well, what concerns do they have, and are these concerns that you've seen manifesting in other people in your family? And how do you think your children would, what kind of changes your children wish you to make? And how do you feel about creating these changes in your life? And they may say, well, these aren't changes that I want to make. And it would be interesting to explore why is that? What holds you back from that? Again, acknowledging, this is extreme, a hard change to make, but I'd be interested in understanding more about, the barriers that you're facing. And often when people can connect with, why other people want it for them, it can start them thinking. Again, it is an extrinsic motivation because it's what others want, but it can start them thinking about, okay, well, those reasons actually might be quite valid. And another thing that we've done in the past is we've connected with people, with others, as we would ask them, do you know someone else that's going through a similar problem right now, or maybe is a little bit further ahead of you right now, in terms of their development of their current disease, and actually often that helps with the future predictions of what can happen to that patient. It's often when we've done this with people with lung disease, and we put them in groups of people with various different severities. It's not until they're there that they realize the reality of what's going on, and actually it can be quite beneficial for some people to see that. Again, fear isn't necessarily a great motivator, but shame isn't either. And so, to say that there is no shame in not wanting to change right now, it might not be for you at this moment. However, if you did choose to change in the future, here are some options that are available to you. So respect that person has autonomy to choose maybe that they don't wish to engage right now, but provide them with levels of support or ask them the questions around why they were motivated to, you know, chat about this a bit more, or what the barriers are. You know, not everyone's going to want to change immediately, but there's seeds to be planted. And if we think about things like the trans-theoretical model, you know, people go through different stages of change. They go through pre-contemplation where they're not thinking about change. They go through contemplation where they're starting to weigh up a little bit of change. They go through preparation where they're starting to take steps. And then they go into action and maintenance, etc. And so it's important to understand that people are on various different spectrums of change. And what you want to do is not make them feel ashamed about the fact that they may not want to change right now, but always leave open the possibility that if they wish to change in future, here are some tools to support you.
Thanks, Heather. And I think that last point is really important, because sometimes the clients that seem defensive on the inside will be considering change, but they're not at the stage of making that happen. So I think it's about giving information so that when they're at the right stage of change, that they know what to do about that. Because I'm sure on the inside they are thinking about it, even if they're not declaring that to you as the healthcare professional. Right, question around, I think it's someone from East Sussex. I recently asked One U East Sussex if they could offer personal training in reach to our inpatient and community teams. I'm assuming that might be mental wellbeing services, and this is not something that's offered. Is there scope for this in the future? Our services are all commissioned and funded by local authorities, and they decide kind of what they want us to provide. So if it's something that they've not currently commissioned us to do, we won't be able to currently do it, but we can feed that back to commissioners. So if anyone from East Sussex, from our One U East Sussex services listening in, might be worth us just mentioning that to our commissioners, that there might be interest in such a service. Someone says, any advice regarding binge eating? Who would like to take that one on? I think we're probably talking specifically binge eating disorder here. Heather, do you want to say anything about binge eating?
I would probably say that would depend on the severity of the binge eating, how long it's been going on, and may need kind of advice and support from a more specialist team. And there are teams out there who will deal with binge eating. Obviously, you know, it's very hard if somebody has got a diagnosis of an eating disorder that's psychologically based, to kind of tackle their weight without kind of being able to get to the bottom of the deeper issues, really. So if there are clients like that, they would probably be better suited to one of the local mental health services rather than maybe our tier 2 weight management service.
Okay, thank you. Someone asks, do you offer counselling sessions for patients who are having difficulty losing weight because of psychological barriers? First up, I'd say the vast majority of our weight management clients will have some degree of psychological barrier, so that would be more the norm than the exception. So I would say definitely refer them through to the service, and the service will be able to determine the best package of treatment for that person. In a number of our services, we have health coaches who can spend extra time with the client, exploring psychological, social, etc. barriers. So in most cases, yes, but refer in, and then we can kind of normally help people, and we can always onward refer clients to other services if we can't help the full package. Someone asks about clients that are referred onto a program that clearly aren't ready for change. So obviously Heather mentioned that some clients are still pre-contemplative or whatever and aren't ready to do the change. Yeah, any thoughts on that? So clients that end up on a program that clearly aren't ready to change, is it a case that they sort of just need to delay starting? Heather, you've helped a lot of people on programs, some of whom perhaps weren't ready. What would your advice to them be? That's Heather Osborne. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think there definitely is clients that we have referred through, and in our initial assessments, it becomes apparent that for whatever reason, it's just not the right time for that client at the moment. And I think sometimes it is okay to say to them, you know, it doesn't sound like it's the right time for you at the moment to be tackling your weight. They might have lots of other things going on in their life. and that may just not be the priority for them at the moment. So usually in those type of situations, we would keep the referral open, explain to them they can come back to us at any time that they feel their situation might have changed, or that they would like support, or that they feel ready at that point to change. And I think that's definitely one of the reasons that we would see people come through our programs. And often we see people finish the program at the same rate that maybe they've started the program. And usually if we were to look a little bit deeper into that, the main reason for that would be because they just weren't ready to change when they started the program, and it just wasn't the right time for them. And maybe for everybody it would have actually been better at the beginning to say, we understand this might not just be a good time for you. So yeah, I think letting them know you're there, letting them know that the support is there when they want it, but sometimes just being able to say to them, maybe don't do it now. Yeah, sounds like the opposite.
Heather McKee, a sort of sub-question to that, is there ever a case for saying to someone, look, just give one session a go and see if you are ready, or is it actually better to fully wait until they're definitely ready? That makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think maybe I would phrase it in a way as, do you have any fears about starting now? Because sometimes people, and I absolutely agree with Heather, it might not be the right time for them. And especially, like the last thing you want to do if someone's going through relationship difficulties or financial worries or anything else, for them to feel like they're failing at something else at that same time and associate that, can be really negative. But what I would say is, would you what would be holding you back from starting right now? And do you have any fears around starting? Because like you say, you flag, for a lot of people it might be the self-efficacy or the self-confidence that they need to actually go to that first session, and actually supporting them in that change can be really beneficial. And also offering optionality, because unfortunately when it comes to weight loss, a lot of people are trying to do it perfectly, or they think, well, that's the point in doing it at all. And saying, the first session is free, or it's you, just because you go to one doesn't mean that you have to go to every other one. Like, this is an experiment. And I just love the word experiment when it comes to creating habit change, because that gives people the freedom to try and see what fits for them. But I would ask about fears, because if you've been a certain way for a long time and you're being asked to change your habits quite dramatically, that can bring up a lot of fear for people, and it can be quite scary, and change can be very scary for a lot of people. And I think acknowledging any fears around change and giving people the option that right now might not be the right time for you. If you choose to just try out one session, here is the information that we can give you. I'd love to know, how you'd feel about those options, and if there's any kind of fears or barriers holding you back about those. I'm open to having a discussion about that. And again, they feel like that conversation is left open. I think that's one of the real main themes of what we said in the last couple of responses is leave the conversation open, offer them the optionality of always coming back. And it's a part of self-determination theory where we offer clients autonomy, so they feel like they have the choice, and that becomes more empowering for the individual, because Lord knows they've shown up to your consultation, they've been told by all their kids, all their grandkids, all their family, maybe their GP, you've got to lose weight, you've got to lose weight, you've got to lose weight. There is no way that they don't know that is on the radar. There is no way that they need, and they think they're going to show up and have this exact same conversation again. They think that's what they're going to be told. And so it's actually quite disarming when you're saying the choice is with you. Here are some things that people in a similar situation have done and found really beneficial. However, if it doesn't feel like the right time, it might not be for you. If you're curious and you want to experiment, here's one session that you can go to, and here's how you can find out more. And when you're ready to have this conversation again, I'm here.
Fab, thank you. Right, question. Could you let me know how One You supports patients once they are engaged? Some examples, please. So it's a little bit different in everywhere we operate, because every area commissions slightly different programs. But to give you a bit of a feel, if you refer a patient into one of our services, it will typically start with a phone call, where we will talk to clients about their eligibility, their goals and their aims. And then they will typically, if that's all okay, they'll typically get referred to some kind of initial assessments where we might take some measurements and have time to talk to the client in a bit more detail about their health, their background, some of their barriers, etc. And then typically they might attend some kind of program which might last about 3 months. It might be a weight management program, it might be seeing a health coach, where people would often, sometimes as a group, sometimes one-to-one, depending on the program and where we are. And they would typically do a program which is focused on a combination of behaviour change, nutrition and physical activity, and particularly if it's weight management, and using sustainable techniques for lifestyle change rather than kind of diet approach. So we have different options and different services, but that kind of gives you a bit of a feel for what some clients might go through. We will be closing in about 5 minutes, but hopefully I've got time just to pick a few more questions out. Anyone got any views on the keto diet? I work in cardiac rehab and get a lot of patients asking to begin with a diet like this. Heather, do you want to talk a little bit about keto?
So keto tends to, the principles of keto are very low carbohydrate, high fat, trying to get the body into ketoacidosis so that it is burning fat. And keto diet was probably most popular sort of maybe 5 years ago. The thing about the keto diet is it's very hard to, again, quite a tricky one to adhere to. You have to be, in order to be in true ketoacidosis, you have to make sure that your carbohydrate levels remain very low, that you're not eating too much carbohydrate. Some people do get really good results with it, but I wouldn't suggest that it's something that you can kind of really stick to long term. It's not very easy to maybe stick to when you're outside of the house. So yeah, I would probably agree with you. It's not something that really I would be advocating. People can become quite constipated when they're following it, because in terms of restricting the carbohydrate, it also means often they have to restrict their intake of vegetables and fruits, and so their fibre intake becomes restricted. When they can get quite a distinctive smell from their breath and things from being in ketoacidosis as well. So it's not necessarily one that I would be recommending. The Mediterranean diet would be a much better option. I think if somebody comes to you when they want to follow that diet and they're well informed and that's what they say they're going to do, then that's fine. You could support them with it, but I wouldn't be recommending it as a choice. Richard, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
No, I agree with all of that. I think I made a comment in the chat already.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You could argue that anything that gets a person started down the right path and motivates them and achieves some measure of success in their eyes might lead on to them building and do further success and make other lifestyle changes, but it wouldn't be my preferred option.
Similar question on intermittent fasting.
Oh, yeah. Can I go?
Yeah.
So I think this is great. I think it's how we worked when we were hunter-gatherers. Don't even get me started on all the problems with the agricultural revolution. So it's a decent way to go. And there are so many different variations. So you've got the 5-2 diet. You've got my preferred option, because I don't like going for long periods without food, is time-restricted eating. I think that's really good. Where you the narrower your window between your first and last bite of the day and your first and last drink, if it's other than water, the narrower that interval, the leaner and fitter you will potentially be. And it probably less than 12 hours is good, less than 10 hours is even better, much less than 10 is probably hard to achieve for a lot of people, especially if you're working. And the evidence around that, I think, is mainly in animal studies so far, but there is growing human evidence. There's a guy called Professor Sachin Panda, who's an expert on it. He's on Rangan Chatterjee's Feel Better, Live More podcast a couple of times. And some of my medical colleagues swear by the 5-2 diet or the time restricted eating. And I try to use it as, if my day isn't going to be optimal in other ways, diet-wise and work-wise, then I can always use that as an option on the days when I'm not doing so good with my lower carb diet, or I've not been as active as I'd like to be. So no, I like it.
Heather?
Yeah, I'm probably not as much of an advocate as Richard. Thinking about, I mean, again, I think it can work for some people really, really well, but I think for a lot of our patients, it would just be a massive step too far. But equally, I think because with the fasting, there is obviously so many different options. There's the 5-2, there's 6-8. There is lots of different ways that it can now be kind of implemented. The studies are still probably a little bit. Evidence is probably still a little bit sketchy around it, although, like Richard said, it is probably emerging more. But again, I think with any of these weight loss options, because there is so much out there, I think it's a case of, because one size doesn't fit all, and for some clients, that's something, because it gives them set rules and set times to eat and set days to eat. Some people love that, and that can work really, really well for different people. So I think if somebody comes to you and says, right, this is what I want to do, then I think, if you can support them and check that they're doing it in a safe way and in a balanced way, then that's great. And again, if it's an option that works for them and they get good results, then again, fantastic. What's to say that that's not a good option for them losing weight over maybe Weight Watchers, which wouldn't work for them, or Slimming World, or so I think it's finding the thing that's going to work for that person as well.
Thanks, Heather. And I think one of the summary points here is anything that's deemed a diet that involves restricting what you do, generally the evidence is that it works in the short term rather than the long term. So I think at some point we have to support our clients to sort of adapt behaviours that are sustainable, and that's more what our courses in our services focus on. But of course, sometimes people need a head start, they need to crack on, and they need something to get them going, and that's where these things I think probably come in a bit more. The other thing, I think Heather McKee talks a lot about behaviour change. It's about a lot of behaviour change. It shouldn't be about restricting, it should be about giving something. So I guess some of that comes in here, Heather, about how do we try and stop people thinking about having to restrict rather than have an attribute in their life.
Yeah, and I always go back to this tool, which I find really useful to help people, find the joy in healthy habits, which is write a joy list. What are the healthy habits that you enjoy? And this might be really hard for people, but it could be something like having a cup of herbal tea instead of a coffee because I feel less jittery, or going for a walk with my dog outside actually makes me feel more energized than sitting on the couch, or eating strawberries in June when they're in season. It's such a wonderful thing to do. And actually what that does is it gets people to focus on what they get back from health. And I ask them to put that list, somewhere obvious, and continue to add to it as they pick up different bits and pieces. But it shows that healthy lifestyle doesn't have to be strain or drain, or as you said, Tim, so well, deprivation and restriction. And actually what we found in the long-term studies is that those that specifically focus on what they can gain rather than what they can lose, those are the ones that actually can stick to their habits long-term. But think about what you'll gain.
Thanks, Heather. We are going to have to leave it there. There's still questions for us to answer, but we are going to have to stop there. What I suggest we do is we've got various team members listening in. Perhaps we can capture some of the unanswered questions and find a way to get answers out. And particularly if they're local questions around what happens in your area, we can feed it back to the team in your area so that future talks, future presentations, etc., can try and cover some of the issues that are being raised. So judging by the questions, there's plenty more we could do on this as well. So perhaps we'll think about more of these in the future. So thanks, Richard. Thanks, Heather McKee and Heather Osborne. And thanks to all of you for giving up your time today. I hope you've found it useful, and I've got some real tangible stuff that you can take back to your own patients. Please do refer into our services if you're operating in our areas. And yeah, we'll hope to see you for something else like this very soon. Take care and bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.